The entire conference room went silent when the CEO pushed a crumpled envelope across the polished glass table and laughed. He thought he was humiliating a poor young woman in front of his executives. He thought the letter in her trembling hands was worthless. Then she looked him straight in the eyes and said 6 words that erased the smile from his face. "You already paid for it once." Nobody moved. For 3 years, 28-year-old Emma Carter had worked in the basement archives of Sterling and Vail, one of the most powerful investment companies in the city. She was the woman executives rarely noticed, the one who carried boxes, organized forgotten files, delivered documents, and quietly fixed mistakes nobody else wanted to admit they had made. Her clothes were always simple, her shoes slightly worn, and her lunch usually came from home in a small plastic container because every dollar mattered. But Emma had something most people in that room had forgotten how to value. She remembered people. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one small act can change a person's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the person standing quietly in the corner is carrying the biggest truth in the room. Emma's father had once worked for Sterling and Vail. His name was Daniel Carter, and for 26 years he had been one of the company's most trusted financial analysts. He had helped build departments, train young employees, and protect the company from decisions that could have cost millions. But when Emma was 16, Daniel died suddenly from a heart attack. After his death, the company sent flowers. That was all. Emma's mother struggled afterward. Medical bills piled up, the family house was eventually sold, and Emma learned very early that grief did not stop the electricity bill from arriving. She took part-time jobs after school, earned scholarships, and eventually found work at Sterling and Vail because it was the last place where her father had left a piece of himself behind. She never expected special treatment. In fact, she wanted the opposite. She wanted to prove she could survive without her father's name opening doors. So she worked quietly. Every morning, Emma arrived before 7. She dusted the old archive shelves, checked document requests, prepared meeting folders, and stayed late whenever an executive needed something urgently. She rarely complained. When someone snapped at her, she apologized even when the mistake wasn't hers. There was only one thing she kept locked in a small drawer beside her desk. An old envelope. It was yellowed around the edges, sealed with a faded strip of tape. On the front, written in her father's handwriting, were the words, "For Emma. When she is ready." She had carried that envelope for 12 years. She had never opened it. Not because she wasn't curious. Because she was afraid. Some letters contain information. Others contain the past. And sometimes the past is more frightening than the future. The new CEO of Sterling and Vail was Richard Sterling, the 39-year-old grandson of the company's founder. Richard had inherited the company after his father's retirement and had quickly gained a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and completely uninterested in sentiment. To Richard, employees were numbers. Profits were proof. Weakness was something to be eliminated. When he announced a major restructuring, hundreds of employees feared losing their jobs. Emma's archive department was one of the first areas placed under review. One afternoon, Richard walked through the basement with several executives. He stopped beside Emma's desk and glanced at the stacks of old files surrounding her. He asked why the company was paying someone to maintain documents nobody had opened in years. Emma calmly explained that some records were legally required and others contained historical financial agreements. Richard laughed. He told her that history did not make money. Emma looked at him for a moment and quietly replied that sometimes history was the reason people understood how to avoid losing money. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He told her she had an interesting opinion for someone whose job description involved filing papers. Emma said nothing. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. During an internal audit, the company discovered a discrepancy involving an old investment account. Nearly $60 million had apparently disappeared from a subsidiary's historical records. Nobody could determine whether it was an accounting error, fraud, or a missing transfer. The executives searched current databases. Nothing. They searched digital backups. Nothing. Finally, someone remembered the old archive. Emma was asked to find the original documents. She spent 6 hours searching through boxes while executives waited impatiently upstairs. Near midnight, she found a folder containing the original transaction records. The missing $60 million had not disappeared. It had been transferred according to an agreement signed 18 years earlier. And the person who had designed the structure of that agreement was Daniel Carter, Emma's father. The discovery saved Sterling and Vale from a legal disaster. But Richard didn't thank her. Instead, he accused the archive department of creating unnecessary complications. Emma said nothing. She placed the original document on his desk and returned downstairs. That night, for the first time in 12 years, Emma took the old envelope out of her drawer. She stared at her father's handwriting. Her hands shook. She almost opened it. Then she stopped. The next morning, Richard announced an emergency executive meeting. Emma was summoned upstairs. When she entered the conference room, she immediately noticed that every senior executive was there. Richard sat at the head of the table. Beside him were lawyers, financial officers, board members, and the company's largest investor. On the table was the old envelope. Emma's heart stopped. Richard held it between two fingers. He said it had been found in the archive and addressed to Emma. He claimed that since the company had recently discovered her father's involvement in the old investment agreement, the board wanted to know whether the letter contained anything relevant. Emma asked who had opened her drawer. Richard shrugged. He said the archive belonged to the company. Emma felt something inside her break. That envelope was the last thing her father had ever left her. Richard leaned back and made the mistake that would change everything. He held up the letter and sarcastically suggested that perhaps Emma believed it contained some grand secret that would transform her life. Then he laughed. The room followed him with nervous smiles. Richard looked at her worn clothes and said that if the letter was truly valuable, perhaps she should prove it. He tossed it onto the table. Then, with a grin, he offered her $1 million to read it aloud. The room froze. Emma stared at him. Richard expected embarrassment. He expected her to refuse. Instead, she slowly picked up the envelope. She looked at the handwriting. And for the first time since entering Sterling and Vale, Emma smiled. Not because she was happy. Because she finally understood why her father had waited. She opened the letter. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small legal document. Emma unfolded the page. Her father's handwriting filled the room with a voice that had been silent for 12 years. The letter began by saying that if Emma was reading it, he was probably gone, and she had probably spent years wondering why he never told her everything about his work. He explained that 18 years earlier, Sterling and Vale had nearly collapsed after a series of reckless investments. Several executives had secretly moved company assets into risky accounts. Daniel had discovered the scheme. He had reported it. But instead of receiving support, he had been pressured to remain silent. Daniel refused. He created a legal protection structure that prevented millions from being stolen from the company's clients. He saved the company, but he knew powerful people were angry with him. Then came the part that made Emma's hands tremble. Daniel wrote that he had discovered something even more disturbing. The company's founder had quietly created a trust for employees and their families, funded by profits from several successful investments. The trust was supposed to provide financial assistance to workers facing emergencies. But after the founder died, the trust disappeared from the company's public records. Daniel had spent years trying to uncover what happened to it. The final legal document showed the truth. The employee trust had never disappeared. It had been transferred into a protected foundation. And the beneficiary of the controlling interest was Emma. The room went completely silent. Richard stared at the document. One of the lawyers grabbed it and began reading. The foundation's current value was estimated at nearly $112 million. Emma's father had never been secretly rich. He had never hidden millions in a bank account. He had simply protected something that belonged to people like him. Ordinary employees. Workers who spent their lives building companies while executives received bonuses and recognition. Emma looked at Richard. Then she remembered his mocking voice. "I'll pay you $1 million to read this letter." She gently placed the document on the table. Then she said the words that froze the room. "You already paid for it once." Richard frowned. Emma explained that the foundation had been funded using company profits that were legally owed to employees. The original trust agreement required Sterling and Vale to maintain it for the benefit of workers and their families. Richard's father had quietly diverted the annual contributions years ago. The amount was enormous. And now Emma, as the legal beneficiary and trustee named in Daniel's documents, had the authority to restore the foundation. The lawyer confirmed it. Richard's face went pale. The $1 million he had offered as a joke was nothing compared with what the letter had revealed. But Emma wasn't interested in revenge. That surprised everyone. She could have destroyed Richard. She could have exposed every mistake his family had made. Instead, she asked one question. She asked how many employees in that building were struggling to pay rent. Nobody answered. She asked how many had delayed medical treatment because they couldn't afford it. Still silence. She asked how many parents were working 2 jobs while executives discussed cutting benefits. Richard looked down. Emma said she didn't want the money for herself. She wanted to rebuild the employee foundation. She wanted scholarships for employees' children. Emergency medical assistance. Housing support. Retirement protection. And educational grants. The board members stared at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. Then something unexpected happened. Richard stood up. For several seconds, he said nothing. The arrogance was gone from his face. He admitted that he had spent years believing leadership meant never appearing weak. He said he had mocked employees because he was afraid of becoming like the people who worked for his grandfather. He looked at Emma and admitted that he had been wrong. Then he offered her something worth more than the $1 million he had joked about. He offered her control of the foundation. Emma accepted, but only under one condition. The foundation would remain independent. No executive could use it to buy loyalty. No manager could control who received assistance. No family member could take money from it. It would belong to the employees. Months later, the basement archive was transformed. The dusty room became the Daniel Carter Employee Resource Center. Emma became its director. The first scholarship went to the daughter of a janitor who had worked at Sterling and Vale for 22 years. The first medical grant went to an employee whose wife was battling a serious illness. The first housing grant helped a single father keep his children in the home they had nearly lost. And every time Emma signed an approval, she remembered her father. She remembered that he had never needed a mansion to leave a legacy. He had simply believed people mattered. One evening, Emma sat alone in the old archive. She opened a copy of her father's letter again. At the bottom, she noticed a sentence she had missed. It said that money could change circumstances, but kindness could change generations. Emma pressed the letter against her heart. For 12 years, she had believed her father's final gift was an envelope. She finally understood that it wasn't. His final gift was a reason to believe that doing the right thing still mattered. Richard eventually stepped down as CEO and began working with the foundation. He was never the same man again. He still made mistakes, but he learned to listen. He learned employees had names, families, fears, dreams, and stories that didn't appear on spreadsheets. And Emma? She never forgot the day the richest man in the room offered her $1 million to read a letter he thought was worthless. Because that day taught everyone something money never could. Never judge the value of a person by the clothes they wear, the job they perform, or the silence they carry. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying a story powerful enough to change everyone inside it. Sometimes the letter you laugh at contains the truth you've been running from. And sometimes, the person you think needs your help is actually the person who has come to remind you what humanity looks like. If this story touched your heart, please support Kindness Corner by liking the video, sharing it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who may need a little hope today. And before you go, leave a comment with the words, "Kindness is worth more than money." Let that be your reminder that wealth can buy comfort, but compassion can leave a legacy. Because in the end, Emma never became powerful because she inherited millions. She became powerful because when she finally had millions, she chose to use them for people who had almost nothing. And somewhere, in the quiet corner of a room filled with old files, her father's letter remained safe. Not because it was worth $1 million, but because it was worth